The AM 560 mobile app on your Alexa-powered smart speaker and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey.
Insert Democrat socialist here.
Runs the Democratic House floor for 30 plus years running. He's promising this and he's stealing that. Where can you get that kind of money? He's using your house like his own piggy bank. You ought to know by now. You can pay off your house here in Illinois, but you can never keep up with the taxes. Oh, how it's always been the plan to have a taxpayer pay, no doubt. Not a matter of if anymore, but when. You're moving out. I said, when you're moving out.
Top of the morning, Dan. And in for Amy this morning, Charles Thomas, former ABC7 political reporter. Since there was a mayoral candidate forum for black issues last night, I will get to that in a second. And that combined with this terrible campus shooting in Michigan State where 3 people were murdered and I guess 5 injured. They've identified the shooter who apparently died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. So we're going to talk about guns. I've already seen the Eva Perón of East Lansing, Gretchen Whitmer, before the cameras talking about guns. This new working paper from a few academics, actually, from Cal Berkeley and University of Chicago. You know, 2 havens for MAGA gun nuts. They find, since we'll hear renewed calls for quote-unquote assault weapon bans like was passed in Illinois, they find in their paper, we find that bans or restrictions that specifically target quote-unquote assault weapons increase demand for handguns, which are associated with the vast majority of firearm-related violence. But just do something, right? Just do something. That's what I'm sure you heard, although I didn't watch all of it, from the mayoral candidates at the NBC-sponsored candidate forum for black issues. Charles, will WTTW be hosting a candidate forum for white issues? That would be appropriate, I guess. What about that? I mean,
I'm not going to touch that one.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being too hypersensitive. But candidate forum for black issues, are black issues different than white issues, different than Latino issues and Asian issues?
On some level, yes.
Okay.
I think some of the issues are different. I mean, they are, I think, more impactful in the black community. Well, the problem is they didn't talk about a lot of them, are the most important ones. They didn't talk about this whole crime piece enough as it pertains to black people. I mean, black people are the most victimized by crime.
Yes.
But our children are committing most of the crime. See, this is something that we don't want to talk about. That the fact that the vast majority of, for instance, carjackings are committed by young black men. We don't want to go there because that's racist.
Well, that's sort of my point. Well, that's sort of my point is to say, I understand that crime is more pronounced in the predominantly black neighborhoods, and that's unfortunate, and maybe that calls for special focus. But, I mean, public safety is not a racial issue. Education is not a racial issue. Economic opportunity is not a racial issue. It shouldn't be. It doesn't have to be. So the different communities, if you arbitrarily categorize people by race, have different levels of challenge, but the idea that there's singularly black issues or white issues or Latino issues is asinine.
Dan. That we talked about this briefly yesterday, and it caused some, a flurry of phone calls and such. The breakdown of the black family.
Yeah,
nobody wants to talk about that. That is, they don't even talk about that in church, man, in black churches that I attend regularly. They're not talking about that. They're as if it doesn't exist when this is at the root, which Bob Woodward just said. Bob Woodson just said, is again at the core of a lot of the problems. We have to find a way to restore the black family. Now, whether you do that through programs of whatever, because they spend enough money on programs, but we have to begin to focus there. And 2-parent families, I believe the more two-parent families you have, the less poverty, the less crime you have.
That's just what the
two,
data says. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the data, but nobody wants to focus on that. And, and that's, I think, the biggest problem. And last night, I didn't watch the whole debate. I couldn't. But there's no focus on that. And we got 6 black people up there running for mayor, and nobody wants to call out this problem and say what they can do in their capacity as mayor. Not they can't do everything, but what they can do in their capacity as mayor to address that problem, which will affect, I believe, deeply, will affect the crime problem and the poverty problem.
Well, our next guest has addressed that in a piece at wirepoints.org with his colleague Matt Rosenberg. Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints, joins us now. Ted, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Hi, good morning, Dan. Good morning, Charles.
Good morning, Ted.
Good morning. Yeah, good to talk to you, Charles. Long time.
Right.
It's fascinating, and to have to go after Bob Woodson is always tough because I love Bob Woodson. I'm so happy you give him a voice. He's an amazing voice for America and for what needs to change. But we argue that these issues are absolutely ignored. Guys like Vallis and Willie Wilson will touch on them, but nobody's leaning into these issues, and these issues need to be discussed. And the risk of being called racist and all kinds of other names, we're going to bring it up because the data is overwhelming. And, we love data at Wirepoints, but it's overwhelming what the problems are. And, there's a lot that needs to be solved.
Well, lay some data on us.
Well, and this is the scary part. And there's a question you just asked, Dan, about whether there's a difference between blacks and the other races. Things like unwed births, they become a problem for all races. You've got in Waukegan, you've got in Rockford, you've got in Decatur, more than 50% of all white births are to unwed mothers. But the problem is much more acute when you look at blacks, right? It's 82% in Chicago. It's over 90% in Waukegan. So you've got a black problem that the numbers are more acute. Education, we talked about the kids not being able to read. 1 out of 10 black kids in CPS can't. Only 1 out of 10 can read. Only 1 out of 20 can do math. We got some really bad results for whites and Latinos too, but the black numbers are acute. And so there has to be a discussion about certain policies, what we're doing, the culture, family, values. Those things are ignored. The whole thing of merit and accomplishment and excellence is gone from many communities, and we need to bring it back. And that means leadership from the mayoral candidates. It's a bully pulpit. You can't do everything at the mayor's office, but you sure as hell can use your bully pulpit to try to change the state level things.
Well, speaking of education in Chicago, you put together this other piece looking at schools. I mean, it's just sort of in the acute cases. There are 30 schools in Illinois, but the list is dominated by Chicago, where there is not a single student reading at grade level, not a single one. And obviously, when you add up 30 schools, you're talking about thousands of kids. There are 53 schools in Illinois, dominated by Chicago, where not a single student is doing math at grade level, not a single one. And again, we're talking about thousands of students. And overall, when you talk about 18% of the schools in the state, only 1 out of 10 kids can read at grade level. A quarter of the schools in the state, only 1 out of 10 kids can do math at grade level. So, I mean, you have, a quarter, let's say, 1/5 to a quarter of students in school right now who are in real trouble because they're just are not going to have the wherewithal to find success in life.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to talk about this. The numbers are phenomenal. 0 kids able to read in a whole bunch of schools. 0 kids able to do math in a whole bunch of schools. And you're talking about some schools that spend a lot of money. There's this one that we talked about recently, Douglas Academy. It's one of those it's one of those empty, failing schools. It's got the capacity for 900 kids. There's only 44 there. They're spending $56,000 a student. And this is all State Board of Education data. This is not my data. It's their data. And yet it's zero. It's zero. It's not 0%. It's 0 kids can read. What are we doing, right? It's Glenn Lowry from Chicago Southside raised who's just a super person talking about these issues, basically just said, look, nobody has time now for kids in a global economy where we have all this competition. We got lots of things going on. Nobody has time for kids who can't read and who can't write. What's going to happen to them? And does anybody care? And that's my question for all this data that we're putting out. Does anybody care about this? Will anybody cover it? Will anybody try to fix it? We don't see anything yet from our coverage of what we've done to hearing either Lightfoot or Pritzker or any of the elite say what they're going to do about this. In fact, all Governor Pritzker did was nominate Tony Sanders from Elgin, who has even worse results in state level. He's now the new superintendent for the state. Makes no sense.
So Ted, how does school choice help change those outcomes?
Well, I think school choice, has a lot to do with giving people the freedom to just choose something better than what they've got. You've got, if we talk about the schools I just talked about, these 30 schools where they can't read, and 53 schools where they can't do math, and the list is much longer when you talk about, as Dan just pointed out, the list is much longer where kids can't perform. Give parents, those engaged parents, those engaged grandparents, those engaged uncles, whoever wants to take charge, give them a choice to go somewhere else. Because if they can't go somewhere else, they'll just leave Chicago. They'll just leave Illinois because there are other opportunities in other states. But school choice is one thing, Charles. But I also, as we wrote this paper and we talked about the unwed births and the broken families, a lot of it starts first with having parents that are engaged, making sure that there's a family unit, right? Before you have children, be married, have a family unit. Because when we see that parents get engaged with their children's reading, there's a lot more success. When you don't have a family structure, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think what I'm doing here, I'm basically begging for I want people to understand that if black parents can choose better schools for their children, they don't get trapped in these places that don't deliver any positive outcomes, and that's what's happening. A lot of these kids who can't read when they graduate high school, or can't do math at grade level, at fourth grade level when they graduate, they must have some choice to change those outcomes. And right now they have no choice. So I believe school choice is an issue black people have to address. And going back to the Democrat-Republican problem or situation, the Republicans are talking about school choice. The Democrats are not. So black people, let's get involved in that conversation. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah. Yeah, Charles, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no doubt. I think that school choice is one of the things. It's not a silver bullet, but it's one of the many tools that need to be used. But I think, it also ties, people have to understand, and part of helping the black community, Latino community, and white community understand that this CPS in the Illinois, they don't tell the truth. And you just said it. They have a fourth grade reading ability, and yet Pritzker and Lightfoot celebrate record graduation rates for these kids as if they've done them a favor.
And
they
castigate
put these kids out, unable to read, and celebrate their graduation. It's a lie.
And then castigate, try to come over the top with moral indignation like Lightfoot did at that Union League Club debate with Mike Flannery when he pressed her on truancy rates and these graduation rates, and it's all negativity around CPS, and it's not what I see every day, and this and that, that sort of papering over this criminal enterprise called the Chicago Public School System that robs children and families every single day.
Yeah, and they call it insulting, Dan. They say you're insulting me.
They're insulted. Right. Well, I'll insult you all day. I mean, right. you could be insulted all you want. What's insulting, what's tragic, and what's unconscionable is the numbers that Ted is recounting, and that's they need more distribution, clearly.
And as a black man, I am embarrassed. I am embarrassed by it. It should not be happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, I went to all black schools when I came up, and they were controlled by black people. The principal was black. There was segregation. I get that, but we had control of our school, and it was a good school. Those people taught me that I was smart. They said, you can do anything you want to do. That's what they did. Because we controlled our own segregated school in our own segregated neighborhood. I'm not saying going back to that. I'm saying control your school, parents.
Yeah, it used to be that you would say anybody can succeed, right? I don't care where you're from, and kids did, and we see that from well, we saw what happened with family incomes for blacks, and things got a lot better for lots of them, but for a whole bunch of people, they're stuck in a place like CPS. They're stuck under a system where they pass them through, and this is what drives me crazy about Lightfoot and others. They will not challenge them, and any candidate, frankly. You have to challenge the fact that kids are passed from one grade to the next, and they can't read and they can't count. And until we challenge that, I think that I would love to hear one of the candidates say that their obsession is going to be that they're going to take CPS from, let's start with blacks, but we can go to Latinos and whites. We're going to get kids, right now it's 1 out of 10 black kids can read. We're going to make it 3 out of 10 in 1 year and 7 out of 10 in 2 years, or whatever it is, whatever crazy metric you want to go for. That's what they should be saying, because they should obsess about reading, because if a kid can't read, it's over, especially in today's world, especially when literacy and numeracy, right, technology and all that. If you can't read and do math, it's over. So let's get an obsession about that and drop a lot of the other subjects.
He is Ted Dabrowski, president of Wirepoints, wirepoints.org, all things Illinois policy related. Ted, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
And he joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking about it, Dan and Amy are talking about it. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Are you growing your manufacturing team this year and need new employees? Turn to Monarch Technical Services. They've been leading the Chicago staffing industry for manufacturing and engineering since 1987. You'll appreciate their vetting process. They meet every candidate in person to interview and test for specific skills. Monarch